So wanting now to shift from our feeding forward and check-in to focusing in on the fourfold practice. I'm going to give a little bit of a frame to the practice, and then you're going to hear 4 stories, each one focusing on one element of the fourfold. I wanted to start with the word practice. So in the English language, there are 2 words for practice. One is written Pratice, practice and practice. Vanessa's just put it. One is with an S and one is with a C. The one with an S is a verb. It's something that we do again and again. We're practicing, we're getting better at something. What we're talking about is a practice with a C, which is actually a way of doing something. It's something that we do to become it, to actually become the practice. And the art of hosting and harvesting meaningful conversation is a practice. Yes, there are methodologies. Yes, there are theories behind it, but it's something that we live into. It's something that we become. Zach just used the word practitioner. It's something that we step into becoming by becoming a practitioner. So it's never enough to do a training and then say, I can do art of hosting. You can only be art of hosting. You can become the art of hosting and harvesting. It's a very, very important element. Just to weave a little bit of the journey, back in the late 1990s, well, in the 1990s, there was a lot of methods that were emerging that were working with collective intelligence. They were working with bringing the system together. A lot of the emergence of this was in the United States, and methods like the World Cafe, open space technology, appreciative inquiry, methods that we use in the art of hosting and harvesting meaningful conversations were beginning to be developed. And there were those of us, I was one of those people, scattered in different parts of the world, who were noticing that the way we did things wasn't really working, and there must be a different way in which we humans can organize ourselves. So we started to meet, and we met in a castle in Slovenia, not exactly the center of the world. I don't know if we've got any Slovenians, but we were meeting in this castle in Slovenia. Supposedly it was Parseval's family's castle, so there was a bit of mystique and all of that around it. And what did we do? We started to practice. We exchanged, we learned, we tried out, we became friends, but at the core of that, we practiced. And that practice, we started to see as we went along that there was like a DNA structure where we could weave the personal with the professional. In a lot of our ways of working, we think we have our professional identity and then we have our personal lives. Certainly here in Greece, it's something that you should separate out, and you kind of do the professional to have good personal time. But we were starting to see that if you can find your practice, you can weave those 2 things. And so what you do is what you are, and that it can come together. And what we also found through this is we began to call ourselves practitioners. And at the heart of being a practitioner is continuous learning. So when you're a practitioner, you never know it all, and you know something, and you're always questing, you're always learning more. So we were asked to do a training. The first one was in 2003, and it was in 2004 when we were sitting together in Denmark. It's a name of a man that is very core to the art of hosting and harvesting, Toka Muller and Monica Nissen. We were at their houses, and we were talking about, what are we really doing here? What is the practice? We didn't know. We were learning it. So what is it that we're doing? And from this conversation, the fire was lit, literally. we discovered the fourfold practice. And we discovered, and I'll speak more now, just a little bit into the practice. The fourfold practice is one practice, okay, with 4 lenses. A lot of times people think it's linear. It is not. It is a whole. It's one practice with 4 different elements, and we're going to hear more on the 4 different lenses. And I love to see the fourfold practices like, do you know what a kaleidoscope is? It's one of those things that when you look into it and you move it around, you see lots of different patterns and shapes. So the fourfold practice has 4 different lenses, which brought together creates a whole. And what we discovered is that even though there are 4 lenses, it's a fractal. So every lens has the other lenses in it, right? And that's the pattern of it. So it's complex. When we share it with people, it can sound linear. It is not linear. And when you're learning, you might need to dissect it and play with it so that you can learn it. But the real power, and it's a power with, not a power over, comes from the interconnectivity of the lenses. So each lens also has particular smaller practices. So it's a practice with other practices embedded in it. And so one of the foundational practices, and you'll hear this from Vanessa, is the practice of listening. Listening is a practice. Listening for future. Listening for what's coming is a practice. So it's a wholeness, the fourfold practice. And then as you dive into the lenses, you find other little practices. And then they all come together. So it's a complex system, which the more you integrate, the more you become that fourfold. And so now Maya and Dimitri and Vanessa and Mira are going to give you small stories from their own journeys. These are personal things they're going to share with you. They're going to share something that has touched their hearts and moments of their practice. Because the fourfold practice is core to being human. So they're going to share some of that humanity with you. In between each story, we're going to take about 30 to 40 seconds of silence. We invite you to have a journal, your pens or papers, and to listen to not just the story, but some of the elements. Finally, the whole rest of the training is based on these 4 practices, on these fourfold practices. So if you don't get everything now, don't worry, you're not supposed to. This is highly complex. We are going to dive into each lens far more in each of the sessions. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to invite Maya to give us about 3 minutes of her story, 3 to 4 minutes of her story.
Hi, you guys. Thank you, Maria. So Julia is just going to share a bit of the model so we can see what element I'm going to be talking to. And I'm going to be talking to hosting others. So I'm going to tell you a story that happened last year when I was in Greece. I was on Lesbos doing a piece of work with a community center for refugees. So I do some work with organizations, grassroots organizations that do hold space and have a community center for refugees, Syrian refugees, Iraqis from all over the world. So I was invited in to do this big event to ask the volunteers, the refugees themselves that help run the place, how could they make it better? And they invited me in, and I offered one of my favorite methodologies, which is open space technology. And they loved it. It's so new and beautiful and self-organizing, and anyone can offer anything. It felt like a lot of possibilities. 3 days before, I'm on the ground. I'm there already. We've been working about it for a while, and I have my core team, right? Because when we go into a big event and we want to do it in a participatory manner, we invite in different people from this community. So I'm working with my core team there, and I realize that the refugees from the team are really not getting what I'm asking. Like, we're trying to come up with the right question, and we're trying to conceptualize the right question to ask the big gathering. And these guys are coming back to me with lists of like, this is how you can improve it. Here, we have the answer. And I'm trying to say, no, no, you guys, we want to ask everybody. It created a lot of frustration. And so I stopped the meeting. I said, let's have a break. I went outside. I started crying because I realized that there was a possibility that I was actually going to create harm. I was going to create frustration and chaos and misunderstandings where I came in to do good. So I go outside, I have a cry, I have a cigarette, and I call one of my favorite teachers, and I call Tova, and I'm crying, and I said, Tova, I'm doing wrong. They don't get it. I'm doing wrong. I suddenly realized I can't do an open space here. And she calmed me down, and she said, you're fine, Maya. A, you're listening. You know that you can't do an open space there. So you have some knowledge. And then B, she said, go back in, chill out, invite people, come to the event, and we will redesign. And that's what I did. I went in and I said, guys, what we planned, what we decided, what I thought we were going to do, I don't think that's going to work anymore. And we went into a new design session, realizing that we needed much more structure, and realizing that we needed to be much more grounded. And my main learnings from this experience was one was the first and most important, which connects to everything, of course, but it was to listen. I didn't just listen to them and try to fix the problem and explain to him why I'm right. I listened deeply and saw what I was causing and took it in and decided to react to that. So one is listening to myself, to my partners, to the group. The second was to allow myself to be flexible, to allow emergence. Something else needed to happen there, not what I had placed in my mind. And so to be flexible enough to listen and to act upon it. And the third big thing for me was to allow myself to change my positioning. So a lot of the work that I do here in Israel or in big organizations is about bringing in some chaos to allow structured organizations to brainstorm or to have a unique informal experience. But in the space of Moria refugee camp, they have enough chaos. They don't need none of that. They needed me to be structure. So there was also a self-identity piece there of needing to let go of my perception of myself in order to really be in service of the people I was hosting. Feels amazing to share this story with you. Thank you, everybody. I think we're going to take a few seconds to allow for reflection. Feel free to jot down anything that might have come from my story before we move to the next story that you're going to hear.
Okay, we are slowly coming back and we are moving to the other side of this map you have in front of you, which is the hosting self domain. While Maya was sharing her learnings, there was this word, myself, listening to myself, allowing myself to be flexible. So I'm just bringing this connection with what I'm gonna share with you. So the question I'm bringing for you, and I would recommend you to listen to that question: how do I create the conditions, the space, so that I show up fully present for myself and for hosting others? And that's the main question of this domain. So I'm going to share a challenge, a story that really, really challenged me. For the past 1.5 years, when I was stepping in for hosting and practicing my process hosting skills, I was kind of, I had this reaction in my body and I was blacking out, which is something that many people might have felt before, some others don't. So this was a really, really painful experience for me. And I really felt devastated. And I really, really felt really strong body reactions. So it was a full exposure. And it might didn't show to the other people, but I really, really, really felt it really deeply inside me. But, and I thought of quitting a couple of times also from doing that. But me being committed to the purpose of just doing what I like and doing art, like working with the art of hosting, where I find meaning, I kept moving on. So this is the journey that started. I said, how I'm gonna work with that? How am I gonna allow myself to host myself and be there for myself and for others, to be present? So I started by recognizing what is happening and naming it. So this is the self-awareness element. You just understand that something is wrong, you just observe it, and most important, you share it. You share it with your system, you share it with the people you work with. So I shared it with my team. And there was a decision for me not to, myself, I decided not to step in so much, but try to observe, try to learn how to listen deeper, harvesting. So I was kind of playing, but stepping in when things were safer for me. From that, then I went to another level, which is deeper understanding of the patterns, deeper understanding of my emotions and of my demons, as we say, the demons that are being triggered when you're out there and you try to host others. And I started self-managing. That's the third part. That's when you understand, when you start working with your deeper emotions, then you start trying to manage them, so that you will be more operational and try to host yourself and to host others. So I started working with, there was a more long term of me, of managing, and I went into therapy, which allowed me to get all this deeper emotion, understand them, and try to bring them on surface consciously. And a short term, which was more on try to keep my balance day to day with workout and different ways of doing it. So what did I just do? I mean, this whole time after this 1.5 years, I just tried to get to know myself better. I just tried to find my own limits and understand when I should turn the engine to be on and when I should turn it off. This is a very important, this is a very self-awareness and understanding is really important in order for you to allow to hold space for presence to emerge. And this is what is hosting self. You create your space so that you can become fully present for yourself and for others. So in that way, and saying present, when we speak about presence, it's about being grounded, it's about being balanced, it's about understanding chaos and being in chaos without fear of the unknown. It's about showing up undistracted and be there for you and for others. There are three levels of self-hosting. There's a physical level, which is you listen to your body and you try to exercise, you meditate, you really, really try to listen to all these body reactions you might have. You recognize them and then you work with them. The second is the emotional level, which is to recognize what triggers your demons. And this is really an important part because it cannot change in one day. It really needs work. It's more long-term. So, and we really need to have in the back of our minds that we're mainly irrational, emotional creatures, but we live in a really, really mechanistic, superficial society. So we shouldn't forget that. And the spiritual level is about connecting ourselves to the intangible, to the unseen. This third element of the self-hosting is really important because this is where you work with chaos, this is where you work with the unknown, and this is where you let go of control, which is a very also important piece. So ways of self-hosting, there are no formulas. You can self-host yourself. You can self-host by meditating, by doing yoga. You can go out in the nature. You can dance, you can sing. You can go to therapy. So there's not a formula. This is something that you decide and then you start working with it. So let's take a moment, as we did before, to let what we heard to sink in. Just find ourselves in that.
Okay. Thank you, Dimitri. Okay, I'm going to speak a little bit about, first of all, Dimitri, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to speak about participating in conversations, and Julia, could you, oh no, yes, perfect, there we go. So participating in conversations or being in conversation. So I'm going to tell a little story about, I was an executive director of an organization in Montreal for quite some time when I was in my early 30s. And it was a real leadership role. I mean, it was a role that really, as a young person, really burned me bright and kind of forged me into my own leadership in a very kind of public way, which is very vulnerable and also very, very meaningful. And when you're an executive director, the role itself has a lot of power in it. Like the role itself is a positional power role. And I was learning how to be comfortable with having power. in that sense. People would look to me as an executive director, and I would think that they were looking at me as Vanessa, but actually they were looking at me in that role. And so at that age, in my early 30s, I was learning how to come into kind of comfort or into relationship with these different kinds of powers that you have when you have a role. When I started becoming a practitioner in art of hosting and in participatory, in the world of participatory leadership, I had left that work. I had left that role, and I was grappling with, well, what is my power, or what is my expression internally, as well as how other people see me as I move into a new role in my life. And I don't know if any of you have ever left a job or left something where you were seen a certain way and you knew yourself in that way. And then when you transition out, you're kind of no longer that person, but you don't know what your expression is next. And so when I started to come into art of hosting and these participatory gatherings, I felt quite shy, actually, inside. And I didn't really know what my best way of participating was, or kind of what my role as a leader was, because I was kind of seen as a leader in a certain way. But now in the world of participatory leadership and not being, not having that kind of position, I didn't really know that role in myself. So as I came into joining and being part of conversations, I kept thinking I was supposed to be someone who should host others. I was supposed to be someone who should call conversations, which is what Maya was speaking about. When you initiate something, or you're the caller, or you're kind of the one who is leading an initiative, and others join you. But I didn't feel that way inside. I was much more curious. I was much more unsure. I was feeling my way around in the world at a new time. And so I found myself participating in many conversations. And there was a voice inside saying, you know, that's great that you're participating, but shouldn't you? Should is always a good indicator that, so shouldn't you be doing something else? Shouldn't you be involved in a different way? But I found myself loving participating, and I found myself loving being in the field when others were offering something that was so deep in their hearts, that they were so on fire about, and I could go and I could listen and participate and be part of that. And what I wasn't realizing was that there was a huge amount of my own leadership, my own way of being a participant, that created something unique in its own way in those conversations. And I didn't really realize it at the time, because I had this inner critic saying, you know, you should be doing more. Participating in conversations isn't enough. And I don't know if you come from cultures where bigger is better and more is better and being visible is better, but certainly in the North American culture, those are very strong values of what is valued and what is not. And Dimitris just spoke about some of the intangibles, things that we don't see, and how important that is. And what I started, and that the intangibles in my culture are often highly marginalized, as not important, as not valuable, and as not powerful. And so that's the kind of dominant culture I come from. However, what I started to experience as a participant in conversations was there's an incredible amount of hosting, of leadership, of presence, a kind of catalytic, catalyzing, meaning like moving things. When you're truly, truly interested in what someone is bringing, as a participant, you help shape it. And you help shape it, and this is what I learned, in the quality of your presence, which of course is what Dimitris was just talking about. Your own inner ability to be in the conversation comes out externally and people feel it. So the quality of my presence, the different qualities of my listening. So I learned that I listen in a whole bunch of different ways, and other people feel it and are impacted by that. I didn't know that until I got that feedback. But that there's a certain kind of catalytic listening that allows things to move. There's a kind of listening and participating that allows things to drop and go deeper. There's a listening that is a kind of loving listening. And when you're in an experience where there's lovingness or kindness around, there's a lot more chance that things move and that people take risks. So I'm speaking about many of the inner pieces that Dimitris was talking about, this kind of hosting of oneself has a massive impact when you're a participant in conversations that someone else has initiated or catalyzed. So these are some of the things I would love us to think about when we go to a conversation, when we join a conversation. What is the quality of listening and presence that makes a difference? And what is my quality? So what I started to realize was that there was a kind of, I was opening myself to my deeper nature. I'm not sure what's happening here on your iPhone or iPad. So what I'm going to talk about right now is what are the qualities of participating that you bring, that you can bring, and that you do bring to conversations, because we can come and be highly disruptive. If we are deeply disruptive or unbalanced or unhappy in ourselves, which is actually a really normal thing, you bring that into the conversation and it has an impact. And so what is the quality of presence? What are the different qualities of listening? But also there's a way of participating also with our voices that can start to weave things together. So I learned that I listen in a way that catches patterns or catches things that are not quite said, and I help amplify them in the way that I participate, because I ask questions, because I get really enthusiastic about what someone says and I really want to support it. Or if I have a difference or I'm disturbed, I don't bring it in a way that cuts people down. I bring it in a way that's curious. I want to ask a question with my own disturbance or with something that I feel isn't quite seen or quite right yet. So these are really important things. And I started to understand that my way of participating is actually letting me lead and become leaderful in different ways. My way of participating is a way of hosting. And so I guess the last thing I want to say is I had the experience, very clear experience of that kind of participating when I did actually, one of the first times I hosted a conversation in an art of hosting training in the UK in 2009. And somebody came to that conversation that made such a difference to my calling that conversation because of the way she listened. And I asked her, I said, why did you come to my conversation? I was so glad that people came because it's pretty scary to initiate a conversation. And she said, I came to witness you and I came to amplify what it is that you're asking. And I thought, wow, okay, that had such a big impact on me. And I was so glad that I asked, because what I realized is sometimes when I ask a question like that, I'm leading myself to something that I'm needing to know. So the way that she listened and participated, I realized was something that I was cultivating in myself. So sometimes when you ask a host or a teacher something like, how do you do that? Or I noticed this, the teacher or the mentor or whoever it is might say, it's probably, you're curious because it's probably something you already have in you and you're seeing it in me and you're starting to grow into it. And I realized that I'm sometimes that person for people. And that when someone played that role for me, it was massively significant. It opened up a whole other way of a different kind of leadership or hosting that was actually about presence and listening and weaving conversations together. So the question I want to leave you with as a reflection is simply, what are the qualities of my participating that make a difference to conversations? What are the qualities of my participating or my participation? And I spoke about qualities of listening, qualities of presence, qualities of pulling things out. So what are your qualities that you either have or that you're leaning into and learning into? And we'll just take a minute or two with that question.
And I'm going to speak to the fourth element that we have here, which is co-create. Or it's also, well, you also say sometimes being in a community of practice, because really it's about being in learning with each other, and also about being continuously in practice and building relationships and skills around that in the practice. And my story, it started when COVID started. It was just suddenly in Spain we were under lockdown, and we just suddenly there was all this uncertainty around. Also in my company there was a lot of uncertainty, just being completely shaken up everywhere in all these different levels, and this moment of shock of just being in the fog. And for me, there was this natural urge that just kind of started inside of me, which was just wanting to be in practice with my community, with my mates. And so I reached out to the Facebook group that many of you are now part of, which is this really big art of hosting group, and also to the mailing list. And I just said, I would love to do some sense making around what's going on. Our practice, it's made for this time. Let's be together. And it took me quite some courage to write into a group where there's 10,000 people. But the response was quite surprising. There was a lot of people that answered, and many of you are in this call actually. And so we had a first call with a couple of people that offered maybe to support me with figuring out what this conversation was all about. And I was kind of secretly hoping that somebody would take the lead after this conversation and to initiate something or together with me. But nobody really did. And so in a way, it was up to me in this moment to decide, do I want to make this step? I felt it was so much needed for myself, and I could see that it was needed in others as well from their reaction, that I decided, okay, let's do this. And I just set up an event in the other hosting group and hoped that somebody would sign up and would offer to co-host. And several people did and stepped up with me and co-hosted the first call. And then I really tried to see how could I create some conditions to self-host, because my intention was not to lead this. My intention was to participate, to be in the conversations. I wanted to be in the circle. I didn't want to be the one like holding it all. I wanted to co-own this and be in practice and in learning. And so there's many people that joined this call somehow. There's Hendrik here, there's Alvin, Darpan, David, Ivana, Julia, and many others of you that have been really part of this journey and have been making this journey, creating it together. We've had now 25 calls with always between 20 and 60 people. They were twice a week, now they're once a week because we are preparing for the summertime. There's a lot of national initiatives that were launched in France and Germany and the Netherlands and Italy and Spain, just inspired by all these different activities. There's a little group of Farsi speakers that came together for a while as well. There's an open space that's happening. There's a party that's happening on the 20th now. And it all was kind of this ripple effect that started happening in the community of people responding and then us also together discovering what was making sense and what didn't, and trying different things, experimenting together. And there was just this hunger, and it was almost like this community was suddenly set on fire. And so what happened to me in this moment was that I was put onto a really personal journey in that moment as well. So it got me really into struggling with, and that was never my intention. Like I was kind of elevated by the community, and there was a lot of visibility. I received all these messages from everyone, and that wasn't my purpose. I wanted to be in a circle. I didn't want to be seen that much somehow. It created some insecurities in me, and also this element of the ego and all this. And so there was a lot of personal learning for me. I invited in some firekeepers to support me somehow, and people that I see as my mates and that supported to hold this. And there's many others of you that also supported by co-hosting and holding this together. So I made this invitation somehow because I really felt this was needed. But for myself also, I learned a lot about staying in inquiry and staying humble, and that maybe staying in an inquiry is a way of being humble and staying in that, because that's what I want. I want to be a continuous learner of this, and also owning my own abilities and standing to that. So there's these two parts. So one thing is that letting go of this, continuously letting go of this and recognizing myself as a learner, and the other part is owning that I have some knowledge and that over the years I've acquired something as well, and there's something that I do know, and kind of finding the balance between the two. And the other big learning is also that when you feel a call inside of you, there is something that's yours and something that's from the field. And the more I host myself and I practice self-hosting, the more I can recognize what's from the field and what's my own somehow. Yeah. I'm just inviting you also to take a moment to reflect on maybe where are you with your experience of communities of practice and co-creation.
Thank you to both the storytellers and also all of us, the listeners. One of the things, sorry, Julia, can you put that image back? Because I wanted to say something, and then open it up for any questions, or not questions, but comments. What's bubbling inside. Just one of the things I wanted to say on this is, as you move from really learning to host self and to becoming a learner yourself. So as you shift from the hosting self to the participating, you really, really develop the practice of learning. And then as you go from participating to hosting others, you start learning how to learn with others, right? So it's not just individual learning, it becomes a collective learning, but it's still quite individual. You're just learning with the others. And then as you move from the hosting to the co-creating or to the community of practice, you become a community that learns together. And in our times of great unrest and great uncertainty and shifting and collapsing that is happening in our world, we really need to move from being learners to learning with others and to learning as communities. Because when we learn as communities, we amplify that learning and we fast track it, right? So that we can find that collective intelligence, which is core to this practice, so that we can actually discover the future, discover the ways of working and living, discover solutions, whatever language you want to use. So I just wanted to share that on the outside of this is also a circle of learning, moving from individual to collective to meta, and that gets amplifies the learning and shifts us to new practice and survival as our species is at that level as well.